Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Daniel Midson-Short. Hello and welcome to the first episode of my Wednesday show, Wisdom Wednesday. Yes, my friends, this is another live show that I'm kicking off this year in 2024. Today is January 10th. 2024, and I'm excited to be starting this show, which I'm calling Wisdom Wednesday because it's on a Wednesday. Imagine that. And we are going to talk about deep thoughts. That's right. We're going to talk about topics that are more esoteric, that are more spiritual, that are more mind bending, that are more about your experience of life and the way that you think and you feel and how you show up in the world. So these may not have as much practical application as our other shows, but this is something I've been excited to do. You can see all the books behind me there on my shelf. I've been doing a lot of reading over many years around the topics of spirituality and personal growth and self-actualization and all the different things. And this is a chance for me to do a little bit more of a deep dive into these topics under the banner of Wisdom Wednesday. So hopefully, at least a couple of times a month, we're going to go live and we're going to talk about a topic around the area of awareness, spirituality, psychology, something that encapsulates wisdom in some way. In this first episode today, we are going to talk about the topic of mindfulness and the power of having more mindfulness in your life. This is a topic that I have experienced many times in my life. I've experienced mindlessness, which we're going to talk about as well. And I've noticed that when I'm more mindful, I tend to have a better experience in my life in all different categories of life. And I'm sure you have experienced this as well. So we're going to talk through some of the ways that we tend to forget to be mindful, what causes us to be mindless. And we're going to discover some ways or rediscover some ways that we can be more mindful in our lives that will hopefully help you on your journey to have more fulfillment, more sense of control, and more sense of purpose in your life, and maybe to be a little bit wiser than you were before. So, what is mindfulness? Well, this is probably one of the most difficult things to categorize, but I actually have a definition here that I really like, that I think is a good way to say it. Mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we pay attention on purpose, in the present moment without judgment. Let me read that again. Mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we pay attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. It's the ability to just be aware of where we are right now in this moment, how we're feeling, what we're thinking, and to not pass judgment about it, not get stuck in our heads, and to let what's happening to us or the emotions or the thoughts that we have actually override who we truly are. And so it takes a little bit of practice to do this, but the more you get into the mindfulness habit, the better your life will be. Now, I want to give credit to the book Mindfulness, which is by Ellen Langer. And this was a book that was written a long time ago. I believe in 1989, this book was first written. So she kind of coined the phrase mindfulness a long time ago. But I think it's more relevant than it's ever been because of technology and the way we live our lives today. There is so much risk of losing our mindfulness in the world. And I recommend, if you do have an interest in the topic of mindfulness, then check out the book. It's definitely worth a read. It's very heavy psychology in some parts. She talks about a lot of experiments and studies that they do, but there's some real pearls of wisdom in here that will help you to better understand it. I'm going to share some of them today, but I'd recommend checking out the book and giving full credit there. So, mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we pay attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. That's what mindfulness is. What is mindlessness? Well, we've all kind of experienced mindlessness. You've probably experienced some today or definitely this week. It's when you forget what you're doing. You kind of catch yourself in the act of doing something you don't mean to do. Maybe it's scrolling mindlessly on your phone or spending hours binge watching stuff on YouTube. Maybe it's eating snacks unconsciously. Maybe it's getting angry or irritated or upset at something that you know shouldn't set you off, but somehow it's kind of overriding your emotions. In all those experiences, you are being mindless. You are not being aware in the present moment, and you are starting to kind of capture yourself in judgment. If you've ever found yourself maybe wasting time on your phone and then you beat yourself up later and think, man, what was I thinking? Why did I just waste half an hour or an hour? What was I doing? That is because you went into mindlessness and then you're beating yourself up for that mindlessness. So the trick is to just catch yourself in the act of mindlessness and to start to move beyond it slowly and to get into this practice. It's kind of like anything else in your life. The more you do something, the more you're aware of it, the better you get at it. So, mindlessness is a natural part of the world that we live in. And especially today, there's a lot of things trying to vie for our attention and make us more mindless than we really want to be. Technology being a big one. Right now, I might be making you a little bit mindless watching this. But if you are consciously here with me and you're aware of why you're here, that makes it more mindful. There are millions of distractions around us today, and companies are very good at advertising and promoting and trying to get us to use our attention in a mindless way so that we are actually the commodity for other advertisers. So it's kind of a bit of a vicious cycle that we all fall into today, but mindlessness is everywhere. It's also just part of human nature. There are different ways that we become mindless, but most of them are actually unconscious. There's a great part in this book where she says, nobody chooses to be mindless. It's just something that starts to happen, or it kind of overtakes us in the moment. And we've all experienced that when you are scrolling on your phone or eating unconsciously, or your emotions get the better of you in some way. You're not choosing to do that. It just kind of overtakes who you are in that moment and it starts to overwhelm you. So nobody chooses to be mindless, but it's definitely something that is a casualty of modern life. And it's just a reality of how we all are as people. We have to keep bringing ourselves back to mindfulness whenever we can. Not easy, but it's definitely worth the effort to do it a couple of times a day at the minimum, I believe. So let's talk about some of the ways that we create mindlessness. And again, this is in this book here. I want to give credit to it, but these are things that I have learned over the years that have really helped me to understand how I become mindless. So the first one is when we create what she calls categories. So we kind of generalize in our lives, we stigmatize, or we refuse to learn new information. This causes mindlessness, stubbornness. If you meet someone, say, maybe it's a person who's more mature than you, let's say, who is very fixed in terms of the music that they like, they hate hip hop music or they hate pop music or they don't understand, this generation's music tastes or whatever. That's because they have created a category where there's good music and then there's bad music in their mind. Another really strong example of this is, let's say, in some countries, it's okay to eat certain animals. In other countries, it's not okay. And if you're a vegan and you have values like that, then you probably feel like none of it's okay. You have created a category in your mind based on culture and based on your beliefs. Usually unconsciously, we create these categories. And what happens is, as we get older, we start to take in less and less information and we begin to categorize ourselves and our lives very strongly. And this causes a mindlessness to set in. This is how we start to get things like racism and sexism and kind of this obstinance that sets into society because we've created categories of people or certain generations or whatever it is that cause people to become resistant and angry. I don't want to dive into a political discussion, but you get the idea here is that categorizing is something that we all do as human beings, but it can cause us to become mindless. We're not aware anymore of what's happening because we're just living with these sort of category filters over our normal everyday lives. So that's the first way. The second thing is repetition. If you have something in your life that you do very well, maybe it's play a musical instrument, for example, or typing on a keyboard, or maybe it's logging into your work computer or whatever, tying your shoelaces. There's all these things that you've done hundreds of thousands of times in your life. Through repetition, you have created mindlessness. Is it necessarily a bad thing? Maybe not. It depends on the situation. What tends to happen is as we become better at something, our conscious mind needs to focus on it less and it becomes an unconscious habit and physical behavior. I think a great example of this is if you ever drive a car, you probably know exactly what it feels like. When you first learn to drive, you're extremely aware of what's happening. You're aware of the traffic all around you, of having to hit the gas pedal and the brake and turning the steering wheel and the blinkers and the mirrors and all the things. And you can hardly focus and concentrate because you're extremely mindful of everything. But over time, as you become a better driver, you naturally start to let that flow and you find that it goes to an unconscious place in your brain and you become mindless. And this is why sometimes when you're driving along, either you're looking at your phone or you're listening to something or you're talking to someone, sometimes someone stops short in front of you and you panic for a moment because you didn't realize you weren't as aware as a driver as maybe you should have been. And instantly you're back in awareness because there was danger for a moment. So, very often we only come back into mindfulness out of repetition when something goes wrong. If you ever have played a musical instrument and you got very good at playing a certain piece or performing in a certain way and you make a mistake, instantly it brings you back to awareness and you're like, oh, what was I doing? If it's a guitar or a piano or whatever, and it can kind of jolt you out of your mindlessness and your repetition into mindfulness. There's been a lot of studies done that are interesting where you have someone, say, a famous pianist or something, who can play unconsciously for hours, but if you ask them, how do you do it? And you ask them to teach someone to play in the same way they do, they cannot do it because it's so mindless that they've lost the ability through so many years of repetition that they're unable to be mindful about it. So, this may or may not be a good thing depending on the situation, but a lot of the time, if we have too much repetition in our lives, our habits start to run us. And if you want to learn more about this, I'd recommend checking out Atomic Habits. It's a brilliant book all about habits and the way we form them and the way they can basically create our lives if we're not careful. But we can also consciously, with more mindful habits, we can create a better life for ourselves. So, repetition is the second way. The third way that we create mindlessness is through context. And context is a kind of a conceptual idea, so it's hard to understand. But a good example of this is if you think about when you're in an aeroplane and there's some turbulence. For some people, that's very scary. It's very disorienting. It can make you feel physically sick. It's not a pleasant experience when you're shaking all over the place and you're not really enjoying the experience of turbulence on a plane. That's one context. If you take that same experience of being jolted and pushed all over the place on a roller coaster, you are consciously choosing a different context and you are actually enjoying it. And one thing I did recently when I was on a plane, there was quite a lot of turbulence when I was traveling. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to shut my eyes and I'm going to pretend that I'm on a roller coaster while we go through this turbulence. And it completely changed my experience because of a different context. I brought mindfulness back to the environment and to the situation, and it completely changed how I felt because I swapped the context. But a lot of times in life, we tend to fall into a context and we feel like we have no control. Very often, if we set up a context like, say, you go to work and you think, oh no, I need to work hard, otherwise I'm going to get fired. If that's your context, then everything you do is going to be focused on trying not to get fired. You're going to have more nervousness. You're going to be worried if you get called into a meeting. You're going to be worried if someone else is doing better work than you. The context is set up the wrong way. Whereas if you say, hey, you know what? I'm here to grow and to learn and to build my skills and abilities, and then I'll see where my career progresses, you have a completely different context. And that is where you bring mindfulness to the situation. So you have to be very careful of a context in your life. Very often we learn them at a certain time in our lives, especially in our formative childhood or teenage years, and those contexts last for a long time. That's where poverty mindsets and bigotry and all those type of things start to form because we've set up a false context in our lives that makes us mindless. So there we go. We have categorizing, we have repetition, and we have context. Those are the three ways that we can become mindless and we can kind of get caught in our own brain or in our own emotions and trap ourselves in our lives just by not really thinking and not being aware of what we're doing or feeling in the moment. Let's now talk about some ways that we can overcome this mindlessness that starts to set in. Because as I said earlier, it happens to all of us. There's no right or wrong about being mindless. It's just part of reality. But especially in the world we live in today, it is very easy to fall into mindlessness and to trap yourself and to live a more meager existence or a more powerless existence because of that mindlessness. So there are three ways that I have learned that are really powerful. And once again, I want to give one more plug to the book Mindfulness. It is really worth reading. There's a lot of ideas in here about how to be mindful in your life, and they're very pragmatic and psychology based. So it's not kind of woo-woo. It's actually useful, practical information. But I'm going to give you three that have really helped me. The first way that I have learned to be more mindful in my life is to just catch myself in the act. So if I catch myself unconsciously eating potato chips, which I like to do, I'm watching TV and I'm eating some potato chips, I start to notice myself just as my hand goes to my mouth. Oh, I'm doing it again. I've eaten 25 or 50 potato chips or whatever, right? I'm unconsciously doing it. I just catch myself in the act and then I just stay aware of it. I don't force myself to change. I don't judge myself. I'm just aware of myself in the moment. I catch myself in the act. That is one of the best ways to start to bring more mindfulness to the situation. Remember what we said earlier. It's the ability to be in the moment, in the awareness without judgment, right? So we're not judging ourselves. We're just noticing what's happening. So catch yourself in the act, whatever it is. If you're in a situation, let's say you are driving along in your car and someone cuts you off in traffic, which happens a lot here where I live, you might get furious and angry, right? And you get all righteous and you want to get back at that person. But if you just catch yourself in the act and say, hey, you know what? I can feel my heart rate going up. I can feel myself justifying getting angry at this person. I don't know the whole story of why they cut me off. They could be in a rush because they're in an emergency. Who knows? Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe they're just driving unconsciously, whatever. If we start to catch ourselves in the act of getting worked up and getting angry, it's a lot easier to start to remove ourselves and to be more mindful from that situation. That is really a part of being present and being aware. Tough to do sometimes because your emotions override, but they are always there and able to help you if you're more mindful and aware of it rather than being led and controlled by them. So, whatever it is that you're doing, scrolling on your phone, eating snacks, getting in an argument with someone, whatever, catch yourself in the act and say, hang on, I'm doing it again. That's okay. I'm just going to be aware that I'm doing it again. And that will start to change the pattern and change the behavior. So that's the first way. The second way that I have learned to be more mindful, which is really simple, is just to get back into your body. Very often, as we talked about with context and things like that, we think a lot of the things are outside of ourselves. So we have to bring the control and the awareness back to our brains and to our minds and to our bodies. One of the best ways that I know to be more mindful is just take a breath. Take a moment, take a deep breath, and you will find that it brings more mindfulness and awareness to your physicality. I like to do this maybe 3 times, just take some really deep breaths, fill up my lungs with air and feel it. And then you'll notice a difference in your state. Really, really helps. Doesn't cost you much time, doesn't cost you any money, but boy, does it make a difference. Another way that I learned from a mentor years ago, which helped me to overcome my anxiety as a public speaker, was just to feel my feet on the ground. So when I was standing up and I was feeling a bit anxious, put all my attention and awareness into my feet and imagine them rooted strongly on the ground. Feel your feet on the ground. And whether you're sitting right now or you're standing when you're watching this, you can feel your feet on the ground. I'm doing it as well. And that brings an awareness back to your body. Doing this helps you to take back control because the one thing you do have control of is your physicality, and your body does have a kind of emotional effect if you change your physicality. So, taking a deep breath, standing up straight, whatever it is, smiling, all those things have an impact on your mental awareness and your emotions and mood if you bring yourself back to your body. So that's the second way that I've learned to be more mindful, is just to go back into my body and bring awareness back to my physicality. The third way that I have learned to be more mindful is to remember what matters. And this is a little bit of a bigger picture kind of thing, but very often, if you get worked up in a situation or you start to go into unconscious, mindless behavior, it's because you've forgotten what really matters in the situation. If I get into an argument with someone, or maybe I get jealous, or I get competitive, or I get frustrated, or whatever it is, if I just stop and say, what's really important here? And I think about it, there's actually a bigger context over the top of it. If you've ever done any work on your life purpose or your purpose statement or mission in life, this can be a great way to reinvigorate and bring back mindfulness. Is just to say, what is my purpose in life? What is the reason I'm here? And what am I trying to do and to be in my life? It's a big question, but you will find if you can bring that context back in, it will really help you to become more mindful. And it takes away a lot of the day to day and the moment to moment worries and frustrations that you can have when you're getting to a mindless kind of state. So, no matter what it is, whatever situation you're in right now, have a think about what is the bigger context? What is your life about? What's important to you? What's important in the situation you're in right now? You may not always have an answer, but it's worth exploring and asking yourself the question. Sometimes you'll surprise yourself with what starts to come up, but what will come up is a completely new context and a bigger picture, a more macro version of what you're going through, which will help you to feel better about yourself. Another way to do this is if you think about, say, you're having an argument with someone, you can just go up a couple of levels in context. So you can say, I'm arguing with my brother, for instance, and you can say, okay, me and my brother are relatives who are arguing with each other. Me and my brother are two males who are arguing with each other. Me and my brother are two human beings who are arguing with each other. And you can see they're just starting to categorize differently will help you to bring more mindfulness and awareness to the situation. And it removes you from that mindless kind of reaction that you have in the moment. So, remembering what matters is one of the best ways that I know to bring a lot more mindfulness to your life and to build that sense of control and power and enjoyment in the moment. So there we go, my friends. Those are 3 ideas to help you to be more mindful, to overcome mindlessness. As I said in the beginning, this is a modern malady. It's something that's always going to be with us, this danger of becoming mindless and living a kind of constricted, bigoted, limited life because we don't bother to think about why we're thinking or why we're feeling the way we are. So all you have to do is just bring awareness back to the present moment, what you're experiencing right now, and not judge it. Just be in it, and you will find that it actually helps you a great deal. And if you want a mantra for this, I think the 3 words, be here now, are probably the best way that you can do that. And I think that's a good way to end our first episode of Wisdom Wednesday. We are going to be back in the coming weeks. I won't promise that I'll do this one every week, but when I'm excited about an idea and I want to share, I have a couple of books here. Besides mindfulness, I have the Tao Te Ching, which I've been trying to be understanding. I've got some Alan Watts here. So I have a lot of really cool books that I'm going to be talking about, different wisdom and ideas over the coming months. So if you're enjoying this show, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you haven't already, check out the playlist because there'll be more videos coming. And for now, be wise and live a good life. And I'll look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Wisdom Wednesday. Thanks for being here.